Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome to the Alien Con Forry Centennial Forrest J Ackerman celebration. We're really happy to have you here. Thank you, all of you die-hard classic horror fans, sci-fi fans. You probably, this man needs no introduction. I do,
Yes,
so I'll
I do.
introduce
Yes, I
myself.
do.
Oh, but Kevin
This
Burns
is Joe Mo.
Thank you, Joe Mo here. And Kevin, of course, is writer, producer, screenwriter, filmmaker of so many things you've seen before, but Ancient Aliens being a premium. And also, as one of Forry's best friends, I can tell you that Kevin was one of Forry's very best friends, and he was there through good times and bad. Luckily, there were more good times than bad ones, and he made some of the bad ones much better. And I am Forry's caretaker, basically. I became very close friends with Forry in the last decades of his life, and ultimately took care of him. We took care of each other for a long time, but then toward the end I was the one that was privileged to look after him. And we have in our midst the legendary writer, William F. Nolan, who's joining us right now. Let's hear it.
I made it, but barely.
We will take you any way we can get you.
My goodness.
Hello. It's good to see you. So we're all friends, and we're just going to play fast and loose, I guess. Kevin has tons of stories to tell you.
And I tell them in the voice of the man himself, Forrest J Ackerman.
He gave me 2 vitamin pills and told me that if I took these 2 vitamin pills, I would live to be 100 years of age. I want a refund.
He never gave me pills. What do you mean?
Is this on?
You want to turn that?
It's on louder.
You hear that?
How many people here, I know a lot of you are here for Ancient Aliens and Alien Con, but how many people here don't know who Forrest
You
J
guys talk louder.
sorry.
Really noisy in the hall.
Oh, okay.
Shut the
Hello.
door.
Shut that door, actually. How about
Shut the
shutting
door.
Shut the door. They're not in here by now, they're out.
In fact, have them removed from the venue. There's enough of us. Oh, no?
No, Joe.
I'm sorry.
No, go,
It's
Joe.
called jumping the shark.
Just a quick little recap.
Turn it
here,
up.
so that we all, sorry we were late.
Turn the
It's
master
a madhouse
on.
out there. I don't know if you've been out there
Yes,
lately, but
it
it's
is.
like totally crazy. So
We'll have our meals brought in.
yeah.
You don't
So
have to go back.
Joe, you introduce yourself.
I'm Joe Mo. I'm Forry Ackerman's caregiver and was his best friend, considered by Forry to be his best friend. That's my privilege. A regular contributor to Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine. I promote the horror convention, Mad Monster Party, in North Carolina in March, and in Phoenix in May. And I'm happy to be here with old friends. We're going to tell some stories, and I hope that you guys will contribute and ask as many questions as you like.
I'm Kevin Burns. Yes, as Joe said, I'm a TV producer, filmmaker, created Ancient Aliens, The Curse of Oak Island, things like The Girls Next Door and Kendra on Top, but
All places we'll never visit.
and but also America's Book of Secrets and The Civil War in Color and lots of other stuff. And no, I'm not Ken Burns. I'm not related to Ken Burns. I like to tell people I do the ones in color. But anyway, I grew up as most of you did. Well, I don't know. How many people here read Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine?
I did.
You did. And
You're a little young for that, aren't you?
I grew up as a fan. I became a friend. He was an incredibly dear man and a very big influence on my life. And I was honored to be his trustee and his executor when he passed away, and worked very closely with Joe to settle all of his things, which were, as you know, monumental. So it was a very special relationship, and it's connected in a weird way to Ancient Aliens, which I'm sure he is now.
Hi, I'm Ray Bradbury.
I thought it was Harlan Ellis.
No, I'm not contentious enough to be Harlan. I'm supposed to be a living legend, but let me tell you something. It's better to be a living legend than a dead legend. So You know who I am. I think I know who I am. I've got a thing that when I don't know who I am, I've got my name right here to find out.
So what do you do?
I write.
Okay.
I'm working on 2 new short stories right now, and I'll be 89 in March, and I'm not getting
My name's Jason B. Brock. I'm a writer and a filmmaker. I work with Bill here a lot, and I did a documentary about Forry. It's called The Acker-Monster Chronicles, and it actually won the Rondo, so as a best documentary for 2014. And actually, Bill and I are both in this, which is just debuting at this convention, which is the Tales from the Acker-Mansion. I don't know if anybody's seen this, but it's for sale at Famous Monsters' booth, I believe.
I wrote the Forry word.
Yeah, he wrote the Forry. I have a story in it, and then Bill co-wrote a story with my esteemed wife, who's still barking.
And I have a 2-page comic
Oh, you're in there
Oh,
also?
great.
that I did for Warren Publishing in 1971.
That's a reprint.
No, they never printed it. But they commissioned me to do it, and I had the original art. And I told Phil, I said, I have 2 pages from Creepy that never went in the magazine.
Yeah, we just saw this last night, and it looks great.
It's
So if you can
beautiful.
get a chance.
And
pick
Forry
up
is
a
the
copy.
lead character in a lot of the stories.
Well, he's in mine. He's in my story. It's him, and he's basically it's an origin story for Vampirella, is what mine is. But I couldn't use the term Vampirella. But that's all right. It doesn't need to.
And your
But-
documentary got praise from John Landis, which,
Yeah,
if
John
you've
Landis.
ever gotten praise from John Landis, it sounds like this. I saw the documentary. It was good. Like he's surprised that anything.
It was good. What can I say? I thought it was the best, but no. He at Forry, we did a long interview with Forry. I remember Joe was there for part of it, but Joe eventually had to say, I have to go live or something, and go eat and stuff like that. And Forry was just sat in the chair for 13 hours. We did this interview. It was incredible, but it was great getting to know Forry toward the end of his life, unfortunately. But he was a wonderful person, I think.
Right to the end, he was.
And I did interview Harlan, unrelated to Ackerman, for another documentary we did about Charles Beaumont, who Forry used to represent, and who was a good friend of Bill's. Bill's in both documentaries, but Harlan, oh my God, he was horrible. He brought up Greg Bear.
How'd that happen?
Greg Bear had said, Jason, when you talk to Harlan, because he knew I was going to go, he says, do not bring up Forrest J Ackerman. And I was very innocent and naive, and I thought, gee, maybe I can fix this. And he says, no, you cannot fix it. Do not bring him up. And I said, okay, Greg, I will not do that. And then guess who brings it up? Harlan did. So I'm sitting there interviewing Harlan, and he's going on and on and on and eating chicken salad out of a container with his fingers. And then finally he says, and there is one person I would not have you interview if I could possibly do it, but I can't. And I said, who would that be? And he says, Forrest Ackerman. And then, he popped a vein or something. I was like, and he just went on for 20 minutes.
What was the problem?
There was a lot of them.
I've heard the one because, for those of you who don't know, I've heard that it was because Forry coined the phrase sci-fi.
That's only
and that Harlan thought it was an abomination and a trivialization of the genre.
That's part of it. That's part of it. The other part is that when Robert Bloch was dying, Forry found out about it, and he said, I'd like to get the final autograph, for my memoirs. And so he wrote a letter. Forry wrote a long letter to Bloch saying, would you mind if I came by for a final autograph? Because I know you're passing on, and we all love you and everything. And it was a very nice, kind letter. Well, Harlan happened to be there when the letter arrived, and he went through the ceiling. He said, how dare he ask a dying man for an interview? How dare he do that? So Harlan was mostly hysterical.
I actually know how that started. Because when Vincent Price was dying, he sent Forry an autograph.
It even says.
And it says, my last autograph. So Forry thought, what a brilliant idea. I will ask...
Brilliant notion.
A wonderful idea. The last autograph. By the way, do you have Forry's last autograph?
Did he do it?
Yeah, he did.
I'm not an autograph guy, so he made me. What do you say to Forry?
But he thought that it would be wonderful to collect the final autographs of his heroes. And Robert Bloch was a very close friend of his. So he certainly did not mean it as a vulgar insult.
Never. And also it needs to be said that Forry and Robert had a very, very specific and dark correspondence. They had a very dark humor. They made fun all the time of death. It was their thing. They constantly were had morbid fascination with it, and a great sense of humor. And the result of Harlan's fit really meant that Forry was disinvited to speak at Robert's service, and
But I heard it was Robert's wife who was the
Ellie.
most offended.
Yeah.
Not Robert.
Right. Well, my understanding when people were there is that Harlan got upset, and in that whole, chaos, he got upset, and he was crying, and Ellie got upset, and it just snowballed from an innocent,
But he didn't mean
close
anything
friends.
by
He
it.
certainly didn't mean anything insulting by it at all. He didn't.
How many people here met Forry? Like met him, went to the Acker-Mansion or met him in person at a convention?
Well, yeah, I did.
He never stopped meeting.
But I'm impressed how many people are here who did not meet him.
You should have.
Yeah, I mean, he was, I have to tell you, I knew of him through Famous Monsters, because a little girlfriend of mine, whose father actually wrote Lost in Space, which is another story, but she gave me my first monster bottle kit, which unfortunately said, "Collect them all" inside. And that has been the 3 words that have ruined my life.
Could have said kill them all.
I can't even stop at an Arby's if they're giving one of a set of 8 glasses, and if I get glass number 2, I have to have glass number 1. But the
Marketing genius.
yeah, I call eBay iBuy.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, I bought Famous Monsters. My first issue was number 28. You always remember your first Famous Monsters. There's other magazines you remember, but I remember that. And you found out with every successive issue that there was a little bit of self-promoting going on, because the editor, Forry, made himself very much a character within the pages of the magazine, and would always tout the Acker-Mansion and the Acker Museum. And I have just seen Metropolis 4,682 times. And you'd go, how would he know? How would you keep track of that? But so he was a legendary character, and when I was now living at the time in Boston, visiting LA, trying to break in as a filmmaker or a screenwriter, I wanted to meet him. And I thought, well, my screenplay will be my entree, but I did not know how I would be received. So I remember calling and leaving a message, thank you for calling Moon Fan, which was his phone number, and what can I do for you? And I left a message, and I get a call back, this is by recording Forrest J Ackerman, and I would be happy to have lunch with you at the Smorgasbord on Tuesday at 11:30. Come to the Acker-Mansion, blah, 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 at Harwood, California. And I show up there, and I ring the buzzer that goes down to the steps that...
Now, which house was
The Glendower house.
Okay.
That looked like it went to Skull Island. If you were ever going down those back steps, there was a sheer cliff down to like this wooded pit where you thought the spider had fallen into it. And there were King Kong standees in the rain and props and all the mold. And I ring the buzzer and I hear, "Who dares disturb the sleep of the vampire?" And I make my way down the stairs, and it was heaven. He was so unassuming, he was so open to his fans, and sometimes at his own peril, because people would come there and rip him off and steal Lon Chaney Sr.'s autographed picture. But
surprisingly little, considering how open he was.
Very open.
If you
He
came
had
on
the
the
run of his house.
Saturday at 11 o'clock, we'd assemble. Sometimes there'd be 5, sometimes there'd be 20. And you'd wait and you'd ring the buzzer and go down and get in there. But if you happened to be from out of town and you knocked on the door on a Tuesday, he'd come to the door and say, "Well, I have open house on Saturday. We're from Australia. Oh, I'm going to take a nap. Come in, exercise your eyeballs. I'll be back in an hour." And he'd let you come in and walk around the stuff. And Kevin was very, very concerned about that at many times. And I think both you and I had conversations at times, and Forry was very mindful of it. It was not an accident.
Sweet, open guy. I mean, like when I went on that lunch, and we got in the 1970-something painted with a brush orange Cadillac with Sci-Fi as the license plate. And I took Mr. Toad's Wild Ride with him down to the Smorgasbord. There was a check for $10,000 that was in the back seat on the floor that he had totally forgotten about. In other words, he was oblivious to the responsibilities of adulthood. That doesn't mean he was simple-minded. He was just open-minded.
He gave everything the same amount of importance. If you were a fan and you'd made a horrible sculpture of the Hunchback, he'd stick it on the wall next to a signed Lon Chaney Sr. photograph. You'd walk through and he'd give his tour and you expect him to say, "This is the only prop left from the Lost World. This is a can of WD-40, and because everything was in a blaze and everything was lit the same way."
Did you ever see my Toyota?
He had a puppet.
He had a puppet of Yoda. That's what I call my Toyota.
Yeah, Forry had a great sense of humor. One thing that I want to say, one quick serious thing, and that is Bill Warren, who was a person that worked with Forry, just passed away. So I think that we should take a moment to acknowledge that. He was a very important figure in Forry's life for a long time.
Probably one of his oldest living friends.
Yeah, for sure. And he was kind enough when we had the debut of this film at the Aero Theater in LA, or Santa Monica. Bill was there, so I'm grateful for that. I just wanted to give him a little bit of a shout out, because that just happened recently. And the other thing I wanted to say is, personally, I feel that Forry, in particular, there's the triumvirate, as I would call it, of Bradbury, Ray Harryhausen, and Forry. And of those three people, I think that, for me, the keystone of those three is Ackerman, because he was the one who saw the potentiality inherent in the format of science fiction, and even to a lesser extent horror, and really started having a long-range idea of archiving this or putting it together. It started as sheer insane fandom, and in fact, I wrote a very long article for, I wrote a very long article for...
Gesundheit, I've not read that.
No. And my wife. And so I wrote a very long article for a thing called the Weird Fiction Review by Pt.1 Press, and it's about Forrest J Ackerman, and it's a very detailed piece about him, but I talk about how he is the keystone figure, I think, in the 20th century for why we have the modern pop culture we have today, in large part, and because his influence was so pervasive on successive generations of people that it's pulled it all together, and now you have, at what John Landis says, you have A-list movies, but A-list budgets on B films,
Yeah, I mean, well, a lot of people ask me, who was he? Like, was he a filmmaker? The answer is no. Was he a writer? Not really, no. Was he, so why does anybody remember him? And it's hard, he was really an enthusiast. I mean, he was an agent. He represented many big classic writers of science fiction and fantasy. He represented artists. Oftentimes, he represented, in the earliest days, L. Ron Hubbard, who everybody...
And Bradbury.
And Ray Bradbury. But he was often the first agent of a lot of upcoming science fiction.
He was Charles Beaumont's first agent. He was Bill's first agent.
Yeah, because he was non-discriminate in his enthusiasm if you had enthusiasm. And in that sense, his love of the genre. He was, when he passed away, and I got George Lucas to actually write what I thought was a beautiful eulogy in the LA Times. Because everybody, he influenced Spielberg, Lucas, Tim Burton, you name it, anybody, John Landis, Rick Baker, I mean, anybody who read that magazine, Joe Dante, of course, Bob Thornton. But he loved the genre, and he was what I termed, he was a utopian futurist. He believed in the possibilities of the future based on science and technology. Now, his vision of the year 2000 never came to pass, but he really did believe that there would be one world language and one world people.
So he had what I call the utopian triangle, and that was nudism, space travel, and Esperanto. Okay, so
nudism, by the way. I have to tell a quick story. I went to dinner with my mother at Musso and Frank's in Hollywood.
All naked?
No. But I went to dinner and I took Forry and with my mom, we had a cursive.
I used to play ping pong in the nude.
Yeah.
I remember that was encyclopedia to ping pong, and there was a picture of him playing ping pong in the nude.
Oh my God.
That's
that image, but I was going to say that I went to the restroom and I came back and my mom and Forry were there and they had chatted, and I then took Forry home, and as he said, "Goodbye, pal," he said, And then I'm with my mom alone in the car. She said, "Don't you ever leave me alone again with that job." And I said, "What happened?" And she said, "He wanted me to go with him to a nudist colony." She said, "Why do I want to look at that?" So, anyway, but he was, at one point, and I don't want to offend any Satanists in the room, but at one point I was having lunch with him.
They love it.
And he said, "I'm having dinner tonight with, Anton LaVey." And I said, "He's a Satanist. He's a very nice person." He was open to all, really, and it was an extraordinary gift. But if anything, he was the cheerleader. He was the Pied Piper of the science fiction fantasy genre. So in that capacity, as an editor and as an entrepreneur, as the ringmaster of the genre, he was tremendously inspirational.
That's a really important point. Spending as much time as I did with Forry, I learned one thing. One of his most common responses to people who were glowing over him, and there are plenty of people my age coming up to him shaking from excitement meeting their hero, he would inevitably, after about 2 minutes of tolerating whatever praise you wanted to heap on me, say, "So what are you all about?" And that, to me, sort of characterizes Forry. We can talk about him in all of these terms, and Kevin will vouch for me. Forry was a happy accident. He just loved everything so much. He ran around bumping into it as much as he could, and when he found anything, his first initial response was to share it. It wasn't to take it for his own, it wasn't to keep it, it wasn't to treat it as anything precious. He wanted to treat it as the most important thing he could share with you. And so that's why he was so open to new artists, and so open to all kinds of people. He thought that everybody had a value, he thought that everybody would love science fiction. And when Forry would meet Walt Disney at the Snow White Cafe in Hollywood, it was never a story about, "Oh, I had a chat with Walt Disney." He would publish it in FM and it would say, "I met Walt Disney and I asked for all of you if Bela Lugosi was a model for the Chernobog in Fantasia." He was constantly looking out for us and constantly being our scout. And, he just really, like you said, a Pied Piper. He wanted to gather everyone around, tell you how great everything was and why. Well, because he knew if you were inspired, you'd make more stuff. And that would mean he'd have more stuff to enjoy, to share, to collect. And his collection was an organic, living, breathing thing that was really there to serve as a physical embodiment of this generosity. And that's why he let people in. He knew. We'd spoken to him, "Forry, why don't you get a camera? Why don't you? I've lost a couple things, but if letting people get close to it like I am and touching it sometimes is the price I have to pay, then I'm willing to do it." Just very mindful of his collection being, vulnerable, and it was worth it to him.
But he wanted people to have access. Just as a point of information, a lot of people might want to know, how does Forrest Ackerman and Famous Monsters connect to AlienCon?
Well, in spite of the name, I'm sorry,
Sure.
I was just thinking this actually. In spite of the name Famous Monsters, Forry's heart really was in science fiction, and that's so. I just want to mention that.
Yeah, no, I think it's an important point. No, what happened was, Forry never owned Famous Monsters Filmland magazine. He was the editor. Jim Warren was the creator publisher of it back in the 1950s, and the story, as I heard it, was Jim Warren had wanted to be the new Hugh Hefner.
They all did.
Because Hugh Hefner, who I actually happen to know, was the Steve Jobs, believe it or not, of the 1950s, because he had become a multimillionaire creating a magazine with a $600 investment. And so everyone thought, I'll come up with a magazine and I'll do that. So, but magazines were in those days huge. I mean, that was a big deal if you were a magazine publisher. So Jim Warren started out wanting to be kind of like some suave character like Hugh Hefner, and decided that he wasn't suave enough. So I guess he decided that monsters were big. Monsters were very big in the late 1950s, and so he created a horror magazine. And he originally contacted Forry because he had heard Forry had a huge collection of stills.
Yeah, originally Jim was going to assemble photos. He was inspired by a magazine Forry introduced to him called Cinema 57 from France, where he'd just been on a trip to Europe. And Jim said, I can do this, we'll replicate it, we'll translate it in English. And Forry went, okay, and left.
You get one shot, right?
Yeah, and then when Jim started exploring, he realized that all of these materials were from different sources, and he'd never be able to get them before. He said, I have them all. So that's how that...
So Forry became the editor of the magazine, based largely on the fact that he had been such an enthusiast of all scientific fantasy fiction, imagine movies, he called them. So he was indiscriminate about science fiction, fantasy, and horror, because it was all the world of imagination to him. So he became the editor of Famous Monsters, not the owner. He edited the magazine up until 1982. There was one issue without him, because he had a dispute with Jim Warren, and then Jim Warren disappeared. So the magazine actually didn't change hands, it just regenerated itself under a different publisher, who initially worked with Forry, and then they had a falling out. But through a circuitous means, Phil Kim, who was putting on Alien Con, actually was, from what I was told by Phil, somebody said to him, look, there's an auction for this magazine, I want to buy it, would you just buy it for me and I'll pay you back? Well, Phil bought it, didn't get paid back, so Phil ended up as the publisher of Famous Monsters of Filmland, which I think he's done a brilliant job regenerating. And so
the IP is what he bought.
He bought Famous Monsters of Filmland, the logo and the right to make movies.
The way that happened, technically speaking, just a quick intersection here, is that the term they use in copyright law is the title went fallow, and so someone was able to come in and assume creative ownership of it, is what happened. So that's just a polite way of saying it was just a nightmare of horror that happened at subsequent.
There's a horrible story about what happened.
Brief honeymoon period, there was a nightmare. Yeah, no, but
so what happened was the ending of Forry's association with the second incarnation of Famous Monsters was very unpleasant. And it was very bitter, and the fans were very divided, and it was very sad. But when Phil got the rights, God bless him, he did the right thing, and he went to Forry. Literally weeks before Forry died, and said, I'm going to buy the magazine, I would love to honor you in it. And to Phil's credit, he came to me as the trustee, and one of the things I was judicious enough to make sure that Forry assigned into his trust were his name and likeness rights. Because I said, Phil, you deserve them. Because Forrest Ackerman should never be segregated again from the pages of from Famous Monsters of Filmland. And so Phil, God bless him, has continued that, where he's publishing this book, which I think is awesome, and a lot of tributes and things to keep Forry's name and legacy out there. Again, not only in the world of horror, but in the world of science fiction. So when the History Channel, with whom I work, was open to the idea of doing a convention, which, God bless you guys, we had no idea how big this was going to be. No idea. You know, you give a party, but you don't know if anybody's going to show up. But Phil was the person I logically went to because I think it's a perfect fit, because he had done some of these kinds of shows before. So that is the weird story of how.
Well, I also think another connection to Alien Con in particular and Forry is not just FM and Phil, but also, like I said, the science fiction thing and cosplay. I mean, it can't be overstated that Ackerman, I feel, and Morojo, his girlfriend at the time, invented cosplay, I think, in 1939 at Worldcon 1. And so there's a picture of him, it's a pretty famous one, where he's standing in this, on this, looks like a, I don't know, like a fire escape or something. Yeah, and the ledge. Well, he's standing up there, and he's in this costume that he made. I think it was Buck Rogers or something.
No, it was from H.G. Wells, Things to Come.
Things to Come.
He was dressed
That's right.
as
He had those Gothic pants.
he was dressed in the Things to Come outfit that Raymond Massey.
Yeah, I remember he had this big flared pants on, you know, like World War I aviator pants, you know, and he had a special belt made and everything. So he was the first fan of any kind to actually assume a costume. So he started the whole business. I want to say something, you know, in my life, I've known two 12-year-old adults, Ray Bradbury and Forrest Ackerman. You know, I was over at Bradbury's house one day, and I said, Ray, you know how old you are? And he said, of course. I said, you're you're 55 going on 12. And he said, so is Forry. And you know, one of the things about Forry, he would have these Saturday showings, and people would steal things from him. And just about every month or so, something would disappear from the collection. It was stolen. And one time I said to Forry, well, doesn't that bother you? Doesn't that drive you crazy? Don't you want to send the cops after him? And he said, no, if it means that much to them, maybe they should have it, which is typical of the man. Very generous.
Yeah, I have a little story. I'll try to make it short because I know you probably have some questions. But when I was really kind of entrenched in Forry world, you know, as his friend and living with him at the Acker-Mansion on Glendower, I remember he came to me because Forry was very enamored of the women. If you could come in and say, Forry, I'm bringing you a copy of my Oscar, and if you had a girl with you, go, oh, who's this? You know, he just direct you. And I remember he came to me one afternoon and said, pal, that Phantasm poster art, I want you to wrap it up. And I said, whoa, wait a minute, you just got that. That's the original art. Well, this girl, it's her favorite movie. I said, well, listen, Forry, why don't you let me make a giclée of it? I'll make it really beautiful. We'll give her that, and then you can, okay. So I set about doing that. 2 days later, I went up to have my breakfast, and I looked at the wall, there's an empty space. He'd given it away. So I was furious because I felt responsible. So I went downstairs and I thought to myself, this is what I'm going to say, and I'm going to make my case. So the next morning I went up and Forry was having his breakfast. And I sat in the chair and I took a deep breath and said, Forry, I got to talk to you. He goes, yes. And I looked past him, and in that space was the most beautiful dark crystal famous monsters airbrushed original cover I'd ever seen. And in that moment I realized a few things. First of all, it's not my collection. Second of all, Forry can do whatever he wants with it. And third, as he'd always said, nature abhors a vacuum, and it was an organic living thing. And every time something would leave, something amazing would come. And that was almost a function of things, you know, rotating in and out of the collection. And that's why I don't think it can ever be recreated. Certainly not without him sitting there telling stories about all of this stuff. But I don't think anybody would ever, that collects, would ever have that kind of, you know, philosophy about the stuff, you know.
The irony here is that Forry was always worried he would be forgotten because he wasn't a filmmaker or an author. And so he would, as you know and you folks know, he would constantly publish. If you were on his mailing list, you would get these, my dream, and he would tell you these stream of consciousness dreams he had or some story, but it would always be accompanied by a list of his friends. And you would always check to see if your name was on the list. But it was this voluminous list. And then he would occasionally send out a list of who would be in my will, and you would always check the list to see if you were in the will.